I'm Alex Goss,
I'm Logan Davis.
and we are PhD students at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. This round we got a different format where we are talking about a game after we've played it.
And it turns out it's sometimes hard playing games. It's even harder talking coherently about them while playing them.
Especially hard games, which we've tackled a few in the last year.
Yes. We were talking about kind of the Bungie anthology and Marathon, the game we'll be talking about today, as kind of its place as an entry in that kind of history of game development from a game company that's been making pretty important games for a while. Yeah.
Hold for dog slurping.
Butterbean, the dog, is also in the studio with us today.
My relationship to Bungie is watching people play Halo and being like, what is that? In 2000, 2001. And then, finally getting an Xbox. And that was really my entry into video games away from, not away from, but growing up we had computer games, right? And that was a very different genre. And I think Bungie was my first video game where it wasn't supposed to teach me about science or math or
not a edutainment game.
yeah. And Halo was certainly I think even my parents were like, wow, this is beautiful. What is this?
It was a stunner when I played that. My dad played game consoles. He introduced us to kind of the PlayStation 1 was my first console that I really waded into. And it did feel like a big moment with the second generation to have the Xbox and Halo come out and see just one of the most wildly beautiful sci-fi worlds with these huge open vistas. And I remember kind of waiting to get Halo 2 in its special collector case.
Oh, yeah.
And Halo 3, and then ODST and Reach, and then I kind of just trailed off of Xbox entirely, and therefore just didn't play them basically until Destiny came out, which I know was also kind of your re-entry, not just into Bungie, but games.
Yeah, that was my pandemic game. I think it goes in a really delightful order of Disco Elysium and Destiny 2, and then that was kind of I'm back in video games now. From a huge hiatus for about a decade since high school. I really didn't play video games until Destiny 2, and I had no idea what I was going to find. I don't even think I really made the Bungie Halo connection.
There you go, buddy. This is better. I also got into Destiny, was shocked at how Halo it felt, and then proceeded to not be once you got to, I think, where you spend a lot of your time in kind of the social component of it.
Oh yeah, that felt compelling to me at least.
Yeah. And the way that I kind of reconnected with them after kind of bouncing off Destiny 2 was my 2020 game, which was called Figuring Out How to Move to Austin, Texas. And happening to be across the street from a neighbor who worked in Mac game publishing.
Oh, wow.
In the 90s, and had a really deep connection to Bungie through the Consumer Electronics trade booth shows there, and would talk to me about Oni, Marathon, some of the other kind of early Bungie works. Just kind of turned me on to Marathon, being like, oh, you have to play the original Marathons, and 2, you have to read Destination Void.
Frank Herbert.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And was just a huge proponent for kind of this game universe, and also how it kind of been played into all the other games that Bungie has kind of made in terms of you're a super soldier with some weird inexplicable magic stuff, and also there's an AI that's decaying and going crazy, and you're fighting a federation of aliens. And they did it in Marathon, they did it in Halo, they kind of did it again in Destiny. And it's this kind of reoccurring motif that they talk about. But yeah, I kind of originally was clued into Marathon because of him, and that was before the kind of game announcement happened, and the game was announced that they were rebooting it into this very different form.
Yeah, it's been interesting to hear that narrative, because Marathon, the 90s, right?
Yeah.
That game was, different technology, different affordances there. What is its proximity to Doom? Because I think that might place in people's heads of what it felt like and looked like and how it differed. Because that game, what I've seen, I haven't played it firsthand, but it's very much interior spaces. You're on the spaceship, right?
Yeah. So it post original Doom, still technologically significant, though not as significant as Doom.
Mm-hmm. Vertical aiming though.
Yeah, so it was one of the first games to support mouse aiming in a kind of full 360 pan the camera sense. Just for those who don't know, Doom, the original one, did a thing called scan hitting, where you'd basically turn your character but not have to look up or down, and it would just kind of do the kind of height aiming for you, so that you didn't have to control that, because not all computers necessarily had mice or mice precise enough to kind of do that kind of work. Versus Bungie, and it's a little bit contested because another game that is escaping right now came out the same week or month that also had this.
Oh wow! Okay.
Was actually using the mouse like we do now to kind of move around and aim, and that's again kind of this company's quiet contribution to like how we think about this genre of first-person shooters is like they're one of the originators of that kind of control scheme. They also, I think this is true, target friction was kind of first majorly mainstreamed by Halo Combat Evolved, where like if you have your reticle over like a valid target, it'll actually slow your aim speed down so that it's a little bit sticky when you kind of go over things you're supposed to do.
Form of aim assist.
A form of aim assist.
Yeah, okay.
Much less the kind of like auto dragging thing that we're used to now, but just if you're kind of whipping around, it's easier to stop where you mean to stop because your speed literally slows down.
The Xbox controller like feels like important to that history too.
Definitely.
But now we're back to like a PC centric, kind of Steam centric platform.
Well, and a PlayStation because they're owned by Sony.
Well, now with Sony, which I mean, we were talking about earlier, how though you're using a DualShock controller on a PC playing through Steam, the heads-up display icons for input prompting
are all Xbox.
Yeah,
controls.
so there's a funny thing there, and it's not so much about the aim friction you're talking about, but like I think that relationship to controllers and gunplay and first-person shooters feels important.
Yeah. So I mean, I think do we want to like hop into a match and just kind of talk through, even just from like the loading screen of this kind of wild hodgepodge, like seeing the shells, right? The player avatars, classes, stand-ins getting like spun out by these moths as these kind of synthetic false bodies in fiction. The aesthetic departure from Destiny for this game, I'm just very curious to see how the devs are going to be talking about that over the next 2 or 3 years at conferences.
Yeah, I mean, the loading screen, you spend a lot of time with these images, and I wonder if that's going to change season to season. I mean, it's already compelling, like, some are pretty visceral and, like, almost hard to look at, but, like, I do feel...
It's one of the moth eating.
Yeah.
It's like very bad.
This game does feel like it has a tie to cinema, and I'm not going to try to get bogged down in aesthetics now, but, like, the cinematic feels so much more crucial to this game. So we'll jump into a match that we played last month, and I guess one of, not the hardest, but progressively more kind of dangerous zones that you can choose to drop into.
Yeah. I'll say this was not our finest night of gameplay, but that's good given the kind of vibe of the game. Like, so much of this game is both deeply detailed and also just like plastic in a way that kind of it is distinctly synthetic material, but I can't really tell you if it's like powder coated aluminum or plastic or like what it actually materially is other than not natural.
Yeah, there's something about like there are no sharp corners in the manufactured object in this world too, or like they're crisp, but they have everything has a chamfer or a fillet that feels like even more synthetic than like a crystal would, right? It's everything has been kind of manufactured.
It's all deeply modular, right? Like everything looks very unitized, very understood as like, you know, similar to the way that they're building large apartment complexes now, where they're basically all the size of this very particular rectangle shape, where you just stack them up and up and up, and they're, you know, you build those chunks off site and then ship them in. Like this whole world, all the synthetic elements do kind of have that same. I mean, you know, we see it to some effect, like literally dropped by a drop ship where they go, and yeah, it's just such a strong, interesting language through this game. I think also there's something, again, kind of adapting that 1990s lack of granularity of aesthetics to now. I was revisiting some screenshots from that original game because it doesn't look like this. It looks a little bit more generic sci-fi, but in the kind of lack of resolution of that old game, right? Because the textures are big, the models are literally all flat sprites. Like, you can kind of force some of this vibe into it in an interesting way.
Okay, to harken back to the graphical limitations of the time then.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Like all the space colonists, the Bobs born on boards in this universe. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Are wearing like very brightly colored jumpsuits, and there's like moments of that kind of really saturated aesthetic, but it's not to the degree that this game currently is.
Oh, so they even push the saturation.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. We were talking too about like how light is treated, and maybe even like from a rendering like technical standpoint, how light is shaped through the engine or the lighting model, and how that saturation like seems to maintain, and tone seems to maintain, regardless of whether you're outdoors or indoors. Like there is kind of like always something very bright in front of you that is maybe signposting, maybe adding to the inscrutability of this world.
Sorry, this was like a totally, absolutely chaotic moment of both of us having like 2 clips of ammunition being stuck in the stairs between like an assault of robots and also like another team. I mean, for context for folks who don't know, you drop into a map with 16,
not teams, but individual human players.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in groups of 3, and you are all, well, wait, that doesn't work. 15, 12?
It's a handful of teams.
It's a handful of teams.
Yeah.
And you are scavenging resources, trying to exfiltrate with those resources from the map. And each team can kill each other to steal each other's loot. So there's like a very tense PvP element to this, but there's also, or PvP element to this, player versus player element to this. There's also a player versus environment with these kind of robot guardians kind of around the facilities.
Right, which we just took out some of, and now I think there's a human team about to enter this room that we're in.
Yeah, you saw the little robot there.
And I do not make the kill.
And I am very lucky to make the kill.
And we actually have a third teammate who was randomly match-made, who I think is outside this little building we're in.
Yeah, I think are actually already dead by the time this happened. I think that's how we were clued in to stay in the building.
Yeah, so I mean that maybe gets us into some gameplay mechanics. I mean, there's a lot of aesthetics to talk about through that whole death scene in the bottom, but like sound, what happens through like communication through teams, whether you have microphones on or chat or just like the sonic landscape of UI, like non-diegetic sounds, diegetic sounds, how you know where you are, how you know what the status of your team is. Very layered.
Yeah, I mean it's both layered, and it's shocking how like tight the number of mechanics are. Like it's not a ton of stuff you can really do. It's just the unpredictability of having someone else at the other side.
Yeah.
That can so deeply affect your game. Because, it's not like you just spawn back in the same map to get your stuff back. Like, if you lose it and you're knocked out and you don't have a teammate to revive you, like, that's it. It's done.
It's gone, yeah.
Which adds a certain amount of tension where people make kind of more interesting moves than maybe, say, a deathmatch where you just kind of throw yourself at a wall.
Definitely. There's always a calculus and always, like, a risk-reward that extends beyond that match with this kind of game. I mean, and now we're, like, looking at loot. We're looking at some of the items that were dropped by some of those, when we say PvE, the player versus environment, like the NPCs, the bots, literal and metaphorical bots in this game. And here's one, our teammate, and we're not looting our teammate, we're reviving them, but we're able to pick up the things that other people dropped, and if we successfully exfiltrate this map, then we get to take those things with us.
Yeah.
So there's also something special about this match that we're playing where we came in with things that were like a default kind of almost level playing field. Not so exciting as they might be in a conventional match, because we're all coming in with the sponsored kit.
Marathon's not the first game to do this kind of extraction shooter formula, right? Like most famously, Tarkov is a frankly much more hardcore version of this, not as sci-fi, not as, I would argue, pretty, though still graphically like really intense and incredible. And I think Bungie and Blizzard share some DNA in this of taking a really hardcore genre of games and figuring out how to like soften it just in the right ways to get it accessible to people. So one of the ways that they've done that, because it hurts to lose things, particularly because you can think about losing everything and then not knowing how to get a match going if you don't have any weapons or tools or equipment. These ideas of sponsored kits. So in Fiction Universe, these companies that will basically give you a gun for free, and it's not good, but it's enough to kind of get you to the loot to help you kind of get yourself going again.
Which I think is a really smart, like,
hugely
Ludo narrative, like thing with like this is a very corporate universe where these kind of few private entities run the material world, and so it's a wry humor that also I think does a lot of world building.
Yeah.
And then mechanically serves that purpose of like letting you drop in without gear if you've been wiped so many times you don't have anything in your inventory.
It was really clever because at least from what I understand, the companies were not a very large role at all in the original Marathon run.
Okay.
And they're doing, I think, a lot of good work on how to advance the story, how to kind of de-heroify players, which I think is important in this setting.
We're not Master Chief.
Yeah,
we're not the kind of Superman.
We're not Hero John.
Yeah.
We are literally a disposable shell without a name, other than our gamer tag.
Which is maybe even a diegetic thing of semi-anonymity.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about this a little bit, but just like how they're playing with modularity, unitized aesthetics, kind of evoking some of the colors of like a shop floor or a warehouse.
Oh yeah.
In this kind of very industrial company, like you're doing errands and contracts as a gig worker for these different intergalactic factions of like New Caloric, the health foods kind of vitamin company, or Traxxas, the kind of military tech. And how the world like literally kind of has almost this kind of Amazon warehouse aesthetic, while also evoking like a distinctly playground kind of big, bold, poppy colors, things to climb on, things to move through, and how it's kind of complecting those two aesthetics together into a single map where you're both playing and also working explicitly in this kind of fiction.
Bungie has their finger on the pulse with like maybe some cultural questions or critiques where it wasn't maybe there in the 90s. The like fictional companies here are taking more of a role of character. The branding, the just inherent brightness of every kind of piece of information in this world feels nostalgic, but it also does feel contemporary, and it does feel industrial, and it does feel playful. But at the same time, I think it shapes like who the player is and who the player's character is, and like we were just saying, like, you're a number, not a name, to quote Hank Williams. This is always a question with games, and especially these kind of live service games that draw your attention daily, but like the labor the player is doing, both as the player but also as the player character.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, it's also just a hugely rich vein of academic research. I mean, even like, I think back to like your presentations about gig work and like Elden Ring, I think tons and tons of work done to kind of understand how play and work kind of get sublimated, and how work shows up in games and how games show up in work. And I was actually scrolling down a GitHub page and didn't learn this until today. There's a little pixelated avatar at the bottom that says like, "Hooray, you're done." Like a completed level in like Mario or something. I think you're right. I think Bungie has a very, very good pulse, topically, politically, and then figuring out how to make that to a compelling aesthetic fiction.
The way you interact with contracts in this game, and the progression system, and again back to the kind of cinematics and the world building, feels very conscious of the stakes of corporate interests versus the kind of health of a species or the individual or the collective, which I think is invoked sometimes in this world.
You are operating in this way that is like kind of a loophole in a series of contracts between these companies and the kind of United World Government in kind of a proxy conflict.
We're on a planet that was an attempted colonization by the UESC.
Yep.
And now these corporate entities are kind of like scavenging for the remains of this mysterious fallout.
Yeah. I mean, some are researching it for unknown purposes. Some are literally trying to recover lost assets in like an insurance claim.
Wow.
Others are just trying to use this as a test bed for like how well they make these synthetic bodies. It's a funny set of logics kind of operating in the same space, and like how do you as a player navigate those, and like it also doesn't matter how you navigate this as much as the fact that you are helping enact them, because they all just arrive to you as like gig contracts to go do something kind of specific and tailored. Of like if you're doing a sec gen contract, you know you're probably going to be jumping off a wall a couple of times.
Okay, right.
Versus a Traxxas, you know you're going to be trying to gather some weird specific items in a very like highly contested zone. Because I think there's a lot of ways that this kind of corporate entity is hiring the kind of dregs of the universe to do their dirty work could be really schlocky and not interesting and not mysterious because it is such an overdone thing. But I think there is a really light touch on how much information they're telling you and how to keep it mysterious in a way that keeps it like, yes, it's that, but it also feels like there's something else going on here constantly, and that a kind of fun flavor to figure out how this game was so distinctly different than Destiny or Halo or any of their other kind of titles.
Yeah.
So this is how you leave a match. You just kind of stand in a whirling pylon and get like beamed out. And that was a successful exfil, so we had to keep all the stuff from that, which is great.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, we are not going to be so lucky the next time.
But there's a different sense of teamwork in this game, because it is ultimately like you leave with your stuff, you take care of your contracts. But some of that is shared. There is some like incentive to cooperate.
Well, and they made that as a post-launch update, which I think we'll also talk about a little bit. So this game got caught in a bunch of Gamergate flack of launching and maybe not doing, at least by perception, the numbers that people would expect. Though what that means, who knows, because all those are always internal. Bungie was making a lot of changes pretty quickly, and one of them was trying to incentivize cooperation and get more people into helping each other, even on competing teams, by like bonuses to exfil, bonuses to assisting players, this kind of mercy item to revive players not on your team, which is kind of an interesting
it's pretty
option.
rad, actually.
I don't really know. I've never seen it used, but I'm sure people have. And, you know, I think they were maybe pushed that direction, particularly because Arc Raiders came out not long before this one did. And, in fact, I don't know how it lines up, but this game was delayed notably, and it may have come out before Arc Raiders if it launched on its original date. I don't totally know if that's accurate, but they would have been in much closer proximity. And that game has such a deeply cooperative nature despite being competitive just because of its user base. Well, I don't know if they're pushed away. They decided to release updates that incentivize cooperation more post-launch very, very quickly. They called it their carry protocol, I think was what they...
Oh, right, which is some delightful
acronym.
Yeah.
And more recently, you know, as game with services now do, they all operate in seasons. For the second season, they're stating that they're going to make more pure PvP and PvE experiences. It's just that if the core concept is it's a pseudo PvP PvE game, and they're saying actually we'll make more distinct modes where it's just one of those two things, that's a pretty big shift.
So some of the earlier entries to the extraction shooter genre were Tarkov
and Arc Raiders.
And Arc Raiders was in the last year as well.
Yeah.
Or closer to Marathon, and so maybe there's like expectation setting and resetting being done by players from that.
I think so. I think also Arc Raiders was just so crazy popular that won the zeitgeist of what people would expect a launch to look like for a game like this were kind of out of whack, and I think also inevitably that trickles up to like corporate projections.
So that pressure being felt maybe by that as much as Steam reviews and discourse on however developers and audiences interact.
Yeah, and Sony had a couple high profile cancellations like Concord and High Guard that they kind of maybe preemptively nixed.
So those were both Sony as well.
I know Concord was. I don't know if High Guard was.
But that speaks volumes.
Yeah, there's just a perception right now of like games kind of like launching and failing, right? That unfortunately stirs up a very particular part of the internet that doesn't really know how games are made or funded or operate, but feel authenticated to comment on it nonetheless. But they are making large changes to the game, which I think is a signal that maybe there is some miss of expectation internally that they're feeling pressure on. Because to Sony's credit, this game was delayed once or twice and also had its own kind of controversy around some like plagiarized art by an ex-employee that they have since settled with to the satisfactory of the artist. But like, it's not a game without a tumultuous development cycle. This game notably had quite a bit of headlines before it launched, right? Like, what kind of ego does that instill to say, like, yeah, we know best, we're a gamer? I mean, the Razer CEO still says he plays games all the time as like a way to prove to you that like he knows what he's talking about.
Well, and that was going to be to counter that as well. It's like also the kind of shareholder demands of what a game should look like. Maybe not feel like, because who knows if they're playing it.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, everyone wants the next Fortnite. Everyone wants the next Roblox. Everyone wants the next, and like, every game becomes an opportunity for that and a vessel for that and is under the weight of that in a way that Bungie is an extremely storied studio, but they also don't make that many games and they're not very large.
Right.
So expecting a, Halo style success with every game launch. I mean, I'd be curious about these numbers because I don't know them, but like, what is the lifetime sales of Halo versus Destiny as a financial outlook, given that Bungie was acquired for a not insignificant sum by Sony?
Yeah.
I imagine pretty good.
Right.
But, how many game companies hit it right every time?
We should have space for that.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I love this game. I think it's great. It's also, I get that they're having to sand some edges on it because that's how games work. I would rather this be a complicated, multi-layered, like, figuring itself out than games that launch before software updates where you just had like, well, this part sucks and there's no way to fix it.
But it could be sanded to a point where it loses its shape.
Totally.
I mean,
totally.
They're, I think, wrangling so many expectations of being a new entry to a genre that has a certain kind of player, past fan bases of Halo and Destiny, which Destiny is, I think, very different game, socially, mechanically, just game loop wise, that I know this game has brought a lot of players, myself included, and other friends we've played with, like big Destiny players. I think balancing that we'll see what that shape takes, but it does seem like they took a risk, and I think I want to see game studios be able to do that, and then not just keep making sequels.
Yeah, and I think, like, to point of literacy and expectation, right, that's something that was kind of both exciting and I think has been a challenge from at least what I've seen people talking about around this game is, often, and a lot has been written about this by scholars kind of across the kind of topical realm of just, like, literacy and play and controls and idioms. But one that I think Marathon v Destiny has brought up in a really interesting way is just like how to think about diegesis.
That's cool.
Because, obviously, right, this is the stuff that's very well studied, is like moving around in a 3D space with two analog sticks is not a fundamental skill. That's a learned one that you have to really step up to and has been kind of built and developed over time from, like, NES days of, like, we have 6 buttons and now we're now at like 26 on modern controllers. Like, it's a lot of input to have to deal with.
Wow. Yeah, I like marking that shift. Just numerically. That's a good point.
It's a huge change.
And we're not born with it. We're not.
It's a learned thing, and as a learned thing in a culture, right? It's also an engendered thing. And there's a lot of people challenging that, right? Adding tension to that, adding friction to that. But that's one realm of literacy that's well studied. I think what's interesting about this game is, like, the role of items. Here, I'm actually going to pause right now because we're about to watch us lose all of our items, and I think this will be very illustrative of the point.
Yeah. Because this is a match we came in with stuff we liked.
Yes, we came in with stuff we liked that was expensive and good, and we got some good stuff, and we're now trying to exfil. And you will...
It's also been a very quiet match.
It's been a very quiet match, which is also not a good sign.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But, yeah, it's just kind of... Nothing's happening. We're just hanging. And then you throw some smoke down, and then this is where we make the mistake, which is you will recognize that maybe there's more smoke than there should have been. And I forget if it's me or you who stops in the middle and is like, wait a second. Yeah, it's me. So that is another team eating our lunch, so to speak.
Yeah.
and like moments.
Oh, and it's over so fast.
It's so fast. So fast. And that's it. We lost all that stuff.
Right.
So, to the point of diegesis and literacy, so much of Destiny is about accumulating items and fashion and outfits and making your person look a certain way and making them very individual and to you and showing all the cool stuff that you got from defeating the particular raid that you did.
Yeah.
And so much of this game is about losing that stuff constantly.
Right, because in Destiny it's permanent. It's like the gun you have is the gun you keep from season to season. Some you kind of invest in further and they grow or they change.
So there's like a big relationship to items and tools there that's like very different than here, where you can do that, but it's also not advised because you're so likely to lose these items. Where instead of as a carrot on a stick to keep playing to get that reward, these are just really resources you gamble with and expend. And like that shift is so dramatic given Destiny as the immediate predecessor to this game.
Yeah.
Which is so anti that mode of relationship with in-game items.
To me, that feels like the biggest point of tension and like expectations and maybe possible discord when you get into a game is like you can't be attached to your tools because, as you said, they are currency that you put in the slot to spin the wheel.
Yep.
Of course, there's some skill involved and knowledge and literacy, but like it really is not pay to play with dollars, but like with the items, the in-game items. Because this game isn't pay to play. Like there aren't things you can buy to become more powerful with your dollars. It's like the things you put in, the exfils you successfully achieve, and the things you take out are what you get to then put back in to hopefully roll higher in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth, I guess, segueing this footage from CryoArchive, maybe most explicitly that kind of gambling, in that I think they specifically say you need to have a kit ante. Is that a word that they use? But
like you have to
you're
come in with a certain value of materials and tools, weapons.
And like for the other ones, right? You can put on a kind of these free kits, or you can use whatever loadout
you can go in with nothing. It'll warn you.
Yeah, it'll warn you. You can just kind of go in blind, and in this one explicitly you have to bring in not just some amount of money, but like a not insignificant amount of money worth of items to potentially lose.
Right.
And this is also a time locked map, so it only opens during the weekends.
Yeah.
It is much bigger and much more complicated, and also all the items in it are way higher value than stuff you would find in the other maps in the game. So it is kind of the kind of end game play right now in the first season. Yeah,
the in-game content, meaning like what you reach when you play the game to a certain level.
Yeah.
This is the reward of sorts, which in Destiny and other games have certain in-game content that is like often more difficult, requires a lot of kind of preparation, and in Destiny fashion requires not just bringing in the gear but also like puzzle solving and experimentation and coordination with team members, and we were able to access it through, I think, maybe a concession Bungie's made with the kind of, there's a sponsored kit that we mentioned before that is for this event only, that you can only use once.
This you can just use once for the entire weekend.
Yeah.
Instead of the normal sponsor kits, which you can just keep buying and keep getting and keep doing and keep using.
I was very distracted for this because I was kind of enamored with like, oh, these things I've never gotten to like pick up before.
Totally.
Were suddenly in my hands or everywhere. The aesthetics of weapons in this game, like perverse as that is, they're like manufactured, or their industrial language is so kind of strange to how a lot of things are built contemporarily.
Problematic that most of our aesthetics in these games are developed through like firearms, right?
Yeah,
but
and what that trains in a player base is like super messy and
super gearhead centric in a very particular way.
Fetishizing things that do violence, like I think we're both critical of. Yeah, as like artists, as people who like make things with our hands and machines and with 3D software, they are, I'm gonna say compelling. I'm not gonna put that word in your mouth, but like they are compelling.
I'm curious to see how they work and move. Right? Like there's a mystery to the object that is like fundamentally fascinating, which is great because of the nature of this game. I'll be staring at it most of the time I'm playing it.
Yeah, I guess maybe that could take us to like thinking about other representations of physical forms in this game, like the body.
Yeah.
You talked about the shells being like 3D printed on demand.
By moths.
By moths of some sort of like...
or silkworms, I guess.
Yeah, who knows what 3D printing technology that can make these bodies that are inhabited remotely through some sort of networked connection. And the design choices that Bungie's brought in through the kind of class and class here, meaning archetypes of player characters that are good at certain things and have certain abilities. They also come with their own aesthetics. So there's like a medic, there's like a kind of an infiltrator, there's a thief, there's
a big brute kind of tank.
Yeah, the
brawler
tank, yeah,
kind of guy.
And then the player character you play most often, the Vandal, which I think is the most interesting departure from classic archetypes of them all.
It both isn't, and it isn't in that, like, they all map cleanly to something, right? You have a stealth, you have a medic, you have a thief. Like, they're all this kind of weirdly medieval style kind of separation.
But then linguistically, we have Vandal, which
causes chaos, also known as DPS, right? Damage per second, right? Like, they're meant to do damage quickly.
Yeah, but you're also like jumping around and you're colorful and you've got headphones on and you've got like cool shoes. Although everyone in this game has cool shoes.
Everyone has cool shoes. Everyone has the tightest pants in the world.
Or are they pants or just legs?
Just skin. No, but I think it's an interesting point in like how there's a tension, particularly in these kinds of games, particularly competitive games, around you have abilities, I have to assess you from far away, you have to have a clear silhouette so I know what I'm fighting.
Yeah.
That's like useful information, which is something they play with a bunch in this game with like some of the kind of blurring effects. And
even between signposting what is a player character
versus
opponent versus an NPC that we're fighting now.
Yeah. And, you know, it's pretty significant that, like, for the Vandal, because you run a lot and you have the sweater sleeves going behind you, you can see me if I can't see you when I'm walking. Like, there's a trail behind me.
Yeah, right.
But that also means that they have to make distinct body types, and that is inherently slightly trepidatious, potentially. But in particular, they've, like, very much engendered these fictive shells that are supposed to be, like, personless.
Yeah.
But they are very coded as, like, this is a femme body, this is a mask body.
And voice acted. To enforce that. Which you can't customize. Other games, you can sometimes customize your voice profile, but here they are mapped to the character in the class. Yeah.
Which, again, is like a Sonic signature moment, right? There's, like, a semiotic aspect of if I'm near a medic and they're saying something, like a call-out or a shout, I'm curious about enemy teams. And if they can hear our banter.
Diegetically, I would hope Bungie would adhere to that, but that feels like a huge risk. I mean, we were playing with another person who isn't in the footage. You know, there were certain actions and abilities that I was activating, and then our friend Carl was like, hey, that's actually making noise, stop. And I was like, oh, it just sounds like a UI thing to me. But like everything is kind of, every motivated action is then like, has a sound. That adds to that landscape for your team to hear, other teams to hear, maybe even the bots.
I mean, both that and even, again, just telling you, like, if you're hearing footsteps, what kind of footstep is it? Is it metallic or is it like a person?
Is it a bot
like,
or a person? Yeah.
There's like a bunch of cool. I mean, this kind of gets into like Mark Gripshaw's work along with a bunch of other people, just like sound as interface, right? How these kind of even if it's diegetic sound, right? There's an extra diegetic component to what information it's telling you from a gameplay or reader perspective. So, you know, the humming of a bot when it's near you, that kind of glitchy breathing that's like very different than a person's sounds. Or the sound of doors opening versus closing, and how you have to make the calculus because that is information to tell you someone is coming through, and if I don't hear the kind of bot clinking, I know it's a person who's coming through. Or the sound of a vent breaking, right? Like, it's a good way to sneak, but if someone can hear you break the vent, they're going to know precisely where you are.
Right. I mean, that adds to the cognitive load of literacies to take on in this game that I think the dressage is possible with enough kind of like exposure and immersion in something, because you don't have time to read everything. There's such an economy of grab and go and move and make a decision as fast as you can. That also happens in sound.
Ear cons?
Ear cons.
Icons for ears. Ear cons.
Yeah, I mean they become ear cons maybe, but like they feel diegetic. They're not always UI elements.
Yeah.
Where it's like that's an NPC, that's a human team, that's an alarm.
That's an alarm. That's a particular alarm. There's different kinds of alarms. They mean different things.
Yeah,
right?
which maybe is more of an ear con, but
yeah. Well, it's that one's at least one that we have a lot of real world reference for. Where like
Sure.
I don't have reference for the sound of a Team X filling in the real world. Right.
Right.
That's something that you just have to pick up over time. That
this funny energy blast.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Oh, I hear a vandal overheating nearby. Like that's not going to be when we have an inherent understanding.
So that's a diegetics sound that becomes an ear con maybe.
Yeah.
For players.
Well, I think there's a bunch of great work of people just being like, too many games. There's actually a shocking amount of non-diegetic, right, stuff outside the world, UI, and diegetic stuff kind of blurring into this extra diegetic space of like, it's both. Because, like, also the real world is like that, right? Like, yes, things are in our real world, but they also tell us things about it in a way that help us navigate it. Of like, a road sign is not non-diegetic. That is a diegetic object, but it has a non-diegetic function of making me read it in a particular way.
I love talking to students about diegesis, but like when we can, it's often invoked in sound and cinema, and it's like a really important entry point to think about the concept. But it is all around us.
Yeah.
In so much of the designed world. And art.
I mean, I think that's why it comes up so much around cinema, right? It's like so much storytelling is done outside of the frame by sound off screen, hard pan. Like that is the technique to establish space outside of what the camera sees. I mean, just to kind of hit it right. Like this is the acousmatic kind of lens. Try to talk about this through like Shion's work of audiovisual. Like, how do you establish space outside of a fixed viewpoint, like a film camera? And you do that frequently either through movement or sound. And games have fully taken that technique to the nth degree, both in terms of diegetic space making and non-diegetic extra space making, and totally non-extra just space making through UIs. Like there's this kind of imbrication of game world, not game world, and then somewhere in between where you as the player are kind of connecting those two things through the information it's giving you.
The beginning of the end.
Yeah, this was a terrible hallway. This is a really, really bad hallway.
Again, it's like it's quiet until it's not. I mean, there was a lot of bots and like the non-playable characters we were up against, and then suddenly, I mean,
all unravels.
This really was a maze as well, in a way that like the more open field levels that we've seen so far, like you can kind of see where you want to go and you can go there. And here it was like, I feel like everyone's being funneled to this kind of
choke point.
Yeah.
Just hope to see some scene setting, because this doesn't end well. So this is CryoArch. So we're on the ship called the Marathon, which was kind of the colonist ship. This is the one area right now in the game that you can actually play. The expectation is they'll unlock successive parts of the ship as the seasons continue, which is if you get to the end of this and you beat this kind of teased enemy, you will access like a non-CryoArchive part of the ship very briefly to tease kind of the next section. We did not reach the end. We died in the hallway and lost a bunch of stuff we didn't earn. And who's to say? Do you want to talk more about the UI at all?
The UI really is a masterpiece in this game, and I don't know if we have examples of everything here, but like the UX, like everything is responsive to touch and interaction. There's like a different flavor for every character, every faction.
Yeah.
It's like it's a sensory overload the first time you jump into it. Not even reading and figuring out what all these icons are, but just like you're washed in it. Yeah.
It is hard to articulate how many things on the screen are clickable and giving you important information at any time. It is incredible that they have both fit it into this and also profoundly incapable of telling you everything you need to know, because I think the amount of information this game tries to tell you up front is like not particularly parsable, because there's just so much of it.
Do you think it throws a lot at you in terms of the actual like onboarding and tutorialization?
Yeah, I mean, even right now, right? So like right Right now, it is telling me I have a sponsor kit equipped. Here is the inventory it will give me. Here are the slots that I don't have and do have, what their money value is, how many of those items I have, what my shell is, what skin I'm wearing, the ability stats for that shell, which are never explained. Some other buttons to go to other submenu UIs, the ability to transition to a vault, a backpack, or an armory at any time, as well as selecting a different shell and customizing the skin of that shell. Not the same as the button that shows me what the shell looks like, as well as all the currency tracking, my season level, and whether I'm logged in, whether I'm in a party, what friends I have on, who I can join, if I have notifications from Bungie, and also a legend to show what buttons do as I'm hovering over any of these elements.
And that's just the top frame.
That's just the top frame.
Yeah, I'm just
right?
looking at drip at the bottom.
Like, it's such a huge amount of information to try to convey in one moment, but it is also important to understand when you're doing this to some degree, and it's crazy to me how good they have gotten at packing that information density in. Here, right, if you want to get these kind of progression upgrades, you have to find, like, unknown biomass and get like 32 of them and then pay $4,000 to a person with a large oil made lion behind them to give you like some extra weapons or something, right? Like, it's a very funny system.
Does the in-game currency have a name, or is it just credits?
I think it's just credits.
Okay, yeah.
There's credits and there's silk.
Oh, yeah. And there's a premium currency too. So you can spend real money on this game in addition to just the base game, but it's all for aesthetics.
Yeah, it's just for skins.
Skins, yeah.
Trinkets, stickers, and I think that's it.
So fashion. Yeah.
Fashion. And there's all that stuff you can also get through challenges in the game too, right? So like,
right.
Certain levels of trust or season progressions, right? You can get that stuff, but you get more of it if you buy season passes, which is a model we know from like Fortnite now.
With the announcements that you were talking about from Bungie about potential game changes, but even just content refreshes that I think any game, Fortnite, Call of Duty, whatever the big, staples are, like, have these cycles.
Yeah.
That I see the discourse being like, oh, Marathon's dead because there's a player drop, but we know there's like other things that like at work in that.
There was a day where you logged on and everyone was like, oh, Destiny's good now, you should play it. And the second one launched better but had a dip and then kind of came back again. So I think this might also just be kind of their shtick, as they like get an idea out there, they figure out what sticks, and then they like invest on that direction more.
Yeah. I'm curious what studios are afforded those dips today with things like Concord and what was the other game we were talking about? High Guard. These like huge amounts of labor and IP and development and testing and marketing go into something, and then they're kind of not given a chance.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good question in particular. Like, part of the freedom, one is prior monetary success, but two is also just like name and prestige of, it would be unfathomable for Bungie to shutter. And I don't know how new companies have that, right? I don't know how you get into that circumstance of getting the trust to gamble money over that course of development at that scale, at that size, at that investment, and not have a lot of stakes put on you and consequently guillotine over your head if it doesn't go well.
Yeah.
I think there's some indie game studios trying to challenge that business model and remain independent. I think Strange Scaffold is one. Freehold Games we mentioned is another, right? There's like a lot of different models, but those games also look very different than Marathon does.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen this. The new Grand Theft Auto is estimated to cost $1 to $1.5 billion.
In how many years of development?
Over 10, because the GTA 5 came out when I started college.
Okay, yeah.
Which was an amount of time ago.
Yeah.
That's not a small studio, and that's a long time to be making a game. And of course, right, they've made like GTA Online in between, and they've released Red Dead, so like there's other stuff going on there. I've been meaning to get to Brendan Keogh's There's No Video Game Industry book, like pick apart. When we say video games in the video game industry, there's actually so many different kinds of companies and works and things that we're talking about.
Right.
And right now in particular, I think with this kind of tension you're highlighting, like, it feels particularly silly to see Slay the Spire next to GTA 5, right? Like,
yeah.
Even better, right? Even a strange game, Solcesto.
Okay.
Next to GTA 5
Yeah.
or GTA 6
Right.
on a Steam page.
Yeah.
Because they're just the material realities of how those games are developed, what they're doing, what kind of people are involved in them, how they're designed, the economic stakes, the business, like they're so different. And it's feeling particularly silly in the last 5 years to compare those, as those stakes have just gotten so many more zeros tacked onto them for larger companies, and the opportunity to make that kind of money has shrunk so dramatically for smaller companies, given the accessibility of making games and getting them on marketplaces now.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But people are still making good games.
Yeah.
This is one of them.
It's an interesting one. I think it could be an episode.
Cool.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sick.
Great.
Hold for dog room tone.
I know. Hard life for Bubber.
Like